First we will bring this image into the Photoshop, by clicking and dragging. Now I will use Pen tool to create a path around the display. Like this. Now in the Paths panel, make this path an active selection, by pressing and holding Ctrl and then click on this path icon. Now make a layer from this selection, and rename this layer as Display. Also keep a duplicate copy of main image. Now I will bring this image into our document. Put it on top of the display layer. Now using Ctrl+T, to transform this image. Rename this layer to Battlefield. And clip it with display layer by pressing and holding Alt key and click between the layers. I have already cut these images from their backgrounds. You will find link to these images in description. Now I will first bring this soldier and transform it and place it here. Rename this layer to Soldier 01. Next bring another image and resize it to match the rest. Place this soldier on top of the CPU, and rename this layer to CPU Soldier. Duplicate the CPU Soldier and place it on top of the display. Like this. Next I'll bring this tank, use transform option to resize it and place it here. Now we will start editing each layer one by one. Hide top 3 layers, we will start with Soldier 1 layer. I'll add some shadows first. Create a solid black color layer below the Soldier 1, make sure the mask is selected, and invert the mask by clicking Shift+I. Now select brush tool and change its shape like this. Set hardness to 0, and foreground color to white. Now start painting like this. We will come back to it later. Now select the CPU Soldier and add a layer mask to it. We need to hide some part of this image. Using a brush with hardness 100 and opacity 100%, paint will black color on the mask. I will speed up the process for you. Here we go. Our CPU soldier does not have full legs, so we'll borrow a leg from this soldier. Make selection around the leg and make a copy of it by pressing Ctrl+J. Rename this layer as leg, and make it a smart object by right-clicking on it and choose Convert to Smart Object. Press Ctrl+T to transform, and right-click on it and select Flip Horizontal option. Now adjust the leg on CPU soldier's right foot. Like this. Now add a black mask on the leg layer, by pressing and holding Alt key and clicking on the Add Layer Mask button. Now reveal the part we need, painting with white color brush on layer mask. Here we go. We need the same leg layer again, so let's make a copy of it by pressing Ctrl+J. Delete the layer mask from this one. And flip it horizontally, using transform option. Go to the edit menu and select puppet warp and adjust the leg as needed. Now add black layer mask and reveal the part we need. The color is not matching accurately, so let's add a hue and saturation layer on top of this leg. Clip it to this layer and click on colorize. Adjust the color till it matches with the rest of the uniform. Right-click on the adjustment layer and click on blending options. Use blend it to reveal blacks from the underlying layer. Click OK. Here we go. Now arrange everything in groups. Now add a black color adjustment layer below CPU soldier and invert the mask. We forgot this part here. Let's hide it quickly. OK. Now add black color below the soldier on places where we need. Let me speed the process. Here we go. Come back to the soldier one and add another black color layer below, invert the mask. Now add shadow like this. Here we go. Now let's adjust display soldier. We need to put him behind the display. Adjust the position using Move tool and add a black layer mask. Now reveal the part we need. Let's speed up the process. Here we go. Again we will add a solid black color layer, but this time on top of the soldier. Invert the mask and reveal this part only. Now group these layers and call this display soldier. Now let's work on this tank. Using transform option, which you can activate by pressing Ctrl+T, rotate it a bit, like this. The tank has some white color around it. To remove it, I will create a selection around the tank by pressing and holding Ctrl key and click on tank layers icon. Now I will go to the select menu and use modify option and contract the selection by 3 pixels. I will create a new layer from this selection, by pressing Ctrl+J. I deleted the tank layer and renamed layer 1 to tank and made it a smart object. Now using transform option, reposition the tank as you need. I will place it here, for now. Now we need to add shadow to this tank. Again add a black color layer below tank layer, and invert the mask. Before starting to reveal the shadow, activate the selection around the display so that you paint inside the display. To activate the selection, press Ctrl and click on display layer icon. Now add shadow by painting with white color on the mask. I added another shadow behind the display using same technique. Now let's change the color of the tank. Add a hue and saturation adjustment layer on top of the tank layer. Clip it with the tank layer. In Properties panel, where it says Master, click on it and you will find several options. We will use these options to remove cool colors and enhance warm colors. Select magenta color and decrease the saturation and brightness. Do same with the blue and the green options. Now increase saturation of yellow color and decrease the brightness. You can experiment as you like. And for red color, I will decrease the saturation and brightness a bit. Here is before and after. Now we will add highlights and shadows, properly. We will start from the tank layer. Add an exposure adjustment layer. Decrease the exposure and offset. Now invert the mask and reveal it on places where you think light is now reaching properly. The light in my case comes from the top right corner. If you are using different images, you need to find where the light is coming from. I will speed up the process for you. Here we go. Next add another exposure adjustment layer and increase the exposure. Set the blending option to linear dodge, and invert the layer mask. Now add highlights to places where light falls directly on the tank. Let's speed it up. Here we go. Here is before and after. Group these layers together and name it tank. Now moving to the soldier one. Let's add exposure adjustment layer and decrease the exposure and offset a bit. Invert the mask and add shadows to the soldier. Here is the speedy addition. Here we go. Now again add an exposure adjustment layer and increase the exposure. Set blending mode to linear dodge and invert the layer mask. Reveal the layer to add highlights. To make this leg look like it is behind the CPU, we need to add shadows on it. Add a black solid color layer and invert the mask. Now I will use white paintbrush to reveal the shadows on specific part. Like this. Also make this side of the CPU dark using the same technique. Here is the speedy version. Now we need to add shadows and highlights on other two soldiers also. The process is same, so I will speed up the process for you. The tank needs some readjustments. Delete both shadow layers below it. Reposition the tank, and add the shadow below the tank. Like this. Also add shadows to the tank using black color layer. We will add background shadow later. Here we go. Now let's add other elements to the scene. This scene is incomplete without a big fire. Let's add that and place it in background. Use layer mask to hide some of its parts. Let's speed up the process. I am using soft brush with 20% opacity to hide outer edge of this layer. Now we need to crash this chopper. Place it here. Using selection tool, cut the wing, rotate it a bit and place it here. We also need to hide this part of the wing from the original layer, using layer mask. Also cut the tail using same technique. Now group these layers together. I am adding a red-orange highlight on top of the group, using hue and saturation adjustment layer. Here we go. We need to add some fire to it. Place this layer on top of the chopper and set the blending mode to screen. Duplicate the layer, and add layer mask to blend the fire with the chopper. Group these layers together. The fire in the background needs some tweaking, and here we go. Now I will use this image to cut this dust part from it. Using select and mask option, we need to smooth this dust layer. Check the decontaminate colors option and create a new layer from it. Rename this layer to dust. Keep a duplicate copy of this dust layer and hide it. Using transform option, extend the dust layer. Go to filters menu, choose blur and motion blur. Choose the specific angle and blur strength and click OK. Now activate the selection of the display and add layer mask to the dust layer, because we need the dust to be inside the screen area. After some tweaking, here is the result. Use a duplicate copy of other dust layer and place it behind the tank. We are going to create a dust explosion. Add some shadows to it and decrease the opacity as needed. Now let's add a missile fire. For that we will use this image. Rename this layer to missile. Transform the image and place it here. Add layer mask and hide the tail of this missile. Now place it a bit far from the tank and add some motion blur to it. Now using hue and saturation adjustment layer, we will add red-orange highlight to this missile. Set the blending mode to linear dodge, and use layer mask to adjust the strength. Now to make it look like it was just fired, we need to add some fire to it. Let's use this image and adjust it as needed. Keep a duplicate copy. Set the blending mode to screen and use layer mask to hide and reveal specific part. Add some motion blur to this layer and duplicate it, adjust this duplicated layer. Now we need this fire layer again for this cannon-like thing. Use screen blending mode. Transform the image and use warp option to adjust it. Add motion blur to this layer. Add a black layer mask and hide it all. Now reveal the part you need. Make a duplicate copy of it to pop it more. Here we go. We need to add highlight of this fire on tank. For that, create a hue and saturation adjustment layer on top of tank layers. Clip it to the tank, and check the colorize option. Make it orange and set the blending mode to linear dodge. Hide the layer using layer mask and reveal the layer on specific places. Like this. After some tweaking, here is the result. We need to add an anti-tank missile, and place it here. Add some motion blur to it, and use smart filter mask to hide it on front part. First group the fire layers together. Using hue and saturation adjustment layer, add some orange highlights. Now using this fire layer, we will add some fire behind the anti-tank missile. We need to add some motion blur to it. Use layer mask and hide some part of this layer. We will use the same fire layer again to add fire in front of the missile, to indicate speed and friction. Adjust this layer and use layer mask to hide and reveal specific part. Here is our result. We will use this image to add debris. Using transform option to adjust this image, and layer mask to hide some of this image. Here is the speed up process. We need to add a global shadow behind the whole screen. For that I will make a selection around full display. Like this. Now make a separate copy of it. Now using the same technique, I will add a drop shadow. Here we go. Now we need to readjust the color of the battlefield layer. We will use hue and saturation layer, and adjust each color to give it more dark and yellowish look. Now go to the filters menu and add Gaussian blur to the battlefield layer. Now use smart filter mask, and hide it from the front part. Copy this smart filter from the battlefield layer to the blast layer, by holding Alt key and click and drag the effect to the blast layer. And using mask hide it from the below part of the explosion. Like this. Add a hue and saturation layer to the blast layer. We will use this layer to adjust the color a little bit. Change the opacity as needed. Group the layers together and name it explosion. Group all other ungrouped layers and name these groups as needed. Now add a hue and saturation layer to the dust layer which is behind the tank. We will adjust the color a bit and make it look like it is far behind the tank. Here we go. Now we need to set the tank on fire. I added this layer, set the blending mode to screen and adjusted it on top of the tank. Remember to keep a duplicate copy of this layer. After adjusting the tank fire layer, duplicate it to make it pop a bit more. Now use other duplicate copy of the tank fire layer and put it in front of the tank. Like this. And we will add some motion blur to the fire from filters menu. Here we go. Now add hue and saturation layer to the dust which in front of the tank and adjust the colors a bit. We need to make bottom part a bit darker and top part a bit warmer. I think the display soldier is a bit too dark, so I will adjust its brightness. And here is the result. Now we'll add a warm look to the whole background using hue and saturation adjustment layer. Check the colorize checkbox and choose a specific warm color. Here is what I ended up with, for now. I might change it later. The chopper we added, it needs a little bit of motion blur so to make it look like it is crashing. The technique is same as explained earlier. After that I added the same warm color to each element, like the battlefield and all the soldiers. Remember to adjust the opacity of the adjustment layer as needed, and clip the layer with specific group. The fire looks a bit glowless, so I added a hue and saturation adjustment layer and colorized whole image to orange-yellow. Invert the mask and paint with soft white brush with 20% opacity. Make every fire part of the image to glow, and adjust the opacity. Let's speed up the process. Here we go. After adding all the elements to the scene, it is time to make a single duplicate copy of all visible layers, by pressing Ctrl plus Shift plus Alt plus E. Rename this layer to Cod Final, and make it a smart object. Now I will add Camera Raw filter to this layer from Filters menu. Here I made some adjustments to whole image. I will speed up the process. If you need to follow, use the speed settings to slow down the video. And I will see you in a sec. After adding Camera Raw filter, the image needs a bit more adjustment. I will make the image a bit brighter and add some more shadows and a vignette. The overall color is yellow, which does not look great, so I added some orange and red color to it. Here is our final result.